Welcome to the quantum signal. You're not watching this by accident. Your body is already responding. And in the next moments you'll discover the hidden switch inside your head that ancient knowledge and modern science both say can calm anxiety and activate deep self-healing. If you feel this resonance, subscribe now. This channel is for those ready to reclaim control over their nervous system and unlock their true quantum potential. Like this video to anchor the activation, and comment activated if you're ready to awaken the healing intelligence already inside you. You are closer than you realize to unlocking something that was never meant to be lost, something that does not need to be added to you because it has always been inside you, waiting silently beneath thought, beneath memory, beneath the noise of the modern world, a hidden self-healing button embedded deep within your head, known to the ancients, whispered by initiates, encoded in symbols attributed to Thoth, the keeper of divine knowledge, the architect of human awakening, and now, at this precise moment, returning to awareness because your nervous system is finally ready to receive it, because your consciousness has reached the threshold where remembrance becomes inevitable, where the body stops being merely flesh and starts revealing itself as a living instrument of intelligence, a sacred technology designed not only to survive, but to self-regulate, self-repair, and self-restore when the correct internal sequence is initiated. And this is not metaphorical, not poetic exaggeration, but a convergence point where ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience are quietly shaking hands behind the scenes of history. Because while the world taught you to seek healing externally, to outsource regulation to systems outside yourself, the truth encoded in your biology has always been the opposite, that healing is an inside job, triggered not by force, but by access, not by struggle, but by precision, and the ancients knew this, which is why they spoke of gates, portals, keys, and points of power in the body, locations where consciousness interfaces directly with the nervous system, locations that, when stimulated, correctly silence anxiety, dissolve internal chaos, and return the body to coherence almost instantly. And among these points there is one that stands apart, one hidden in plain sight at the base of the skull, a gateway once revered as the place where heaven and earth communicate within the human form, known in Taoist traditions as Feng Fu, known in esoteric texts as the Gate of Wind, known in Hermetic teachings as the silent switchboard between mind and matter, and known in modern language as a direct access point to the vagus nerve, the master regulator of your internal state, the biological bridge between safety and survival, between contraction and expansion, between fragmentation and wholeness. And what you are about to understand is that this is not just anatomy, it is initiation, because the vagus nerve is not merely a nerve, it is the communication superhighway between your brain and every vital organ. It is the difference between being trapped in fight or flight and living in regulation, presence, and vitality. And when Thoth spoke of the mind as a temple and the body as a vessel of light, this is what was meant, that there exists within you a literal physical, neurological switch that can be activated consciously, gently, rhythmically, to tell your system that it is safe again, that the threat has passed, that the armor can dissolve, that the breath can deepen, that the heart can soften, and that the frozen energy stored in muscles, tissues, and fascia can finally release. And this is why so many people feel exhausted without knowing why, anxious without cause, tense even in moments of rest, because the nervous system has been locked in a defensive loop for too long, running ancient survival programs in a world that no longer requires them. And the tragedy is not that this happened, but that no one taught you how to turn it off. Because once you understand where this hidden button is and how to activate it, your relationship with stress changes permanently. Your body begins to listen to you again, and the internal war you thought was normal starts to quiet. And this is where the ancient teachings become startlingly practical, because the sages were not mystics floating above the body. They were engineers of consciousness. They observed how breath, posture, touch, and intention altered internal chemistry, long before the language of neurotransmitters existed. They knew that pressing, cooling, stimulating, or focusing attention on specific points could create immediate shifts in awareness, emotional tone, and physical sensation, and Feng Fu was considered one of the most powerful of these points, because it sits at the junction where the skull meets the spine, where the brainstem transitions into the spinal cord, where the command center of autonomic regulation quietly hums beneath the surface, and stimulating this area does not force the body to change, it reminds the body of its original setting, like rebooting a system that has been running corrupted code for years, and modern neuroscience now confirms what the ancients intuited. That gentle stimulation of this region can influence vagal tone, improve parasympathetic activation, and bring the nervous system out of chronic stress patterns. But what science does not yet measure is the subjective experience, the moment when the mind suddenly drops into stillness, when the breath deepens without effort, when the chest softens, when a warmth or wave of release moves through the body, and the person realizes, often with tears, that they have been holding themselves together for far too long, and that this release is not weakness, it is intelligence returning. And Thoth's teachings speak directly to this, not as mythology, but as encoded instruction, because in Hermetic philosophy the body is the book, the nervous system is the language, and consciousness is the reader. And when you learn to read yourself correctly, healing becomes less about fixing and more about allowing, less about effort and more about alignment. And this is why this knowledge was hidden, not because it was dangerous, but because it was powerful. Because a regulated human is difficult to control, a calm nervous system is resistant to fear-based manipulation, and a person who knows how to return to internal coherence becomes sovereign over their own state. And sovereignty has always been the true forbidden knowledge. And yet here you are, drawn to this message not by coincidence but by resonance, because something in you already knows this is real, something in your body recognizes the signal, and that recognition is the first sign that the switch is already beginning to awaken. Because awareness precedes activation, attention precedes transformation, and the moment you place conscious focus on this hidden gateway, you begin the process of reclaiming control over your internal environment. And this is not about instant miracles or bypassing life's challenges. It is about building a direct relationship with your own nervous system, about learning how to communicate safety to your cells, how to signal to your brain that it no longer needs to scan for danger every second, and when that signal is received consistently, the body does what it has always known how to do. It heals, it restores, it recalibrates, because healing is not something the body lacks, it is something it forgets under prolonged stress. And Thoth's role in this story is not as a God-demanding belief, but as a symbol of remembrance, a reminder that advanced knowledge does not always come from the future. Sometimes it comes from the past, looping back into the present when humanity is finally mature enough to integrate it without distortion. And as you continue this journey, as you learn not just where this hidden button is, but how to approach it with respect, patience, and intention, you will begin to experience your body not as an enemy or a burden, but as an ally, a sacred temple capable of profound self-regulation. And this is only the beginning, because Chapter 1 is not about activation yet. It is about recognition, about understanding that you are not broken, that your anxiety is not a flaw, that your tension is not a failure, but signals from a system that has been overworked and under-instructed. And the moment you realize there is a way to speak directly to that system, a way to gently press the reset button from within, everything changes. Because hope is no longer abstract, it becomes embodied. It becomes something you can feel in your breath, in your spine, in the quieting of your thoughts. And as this awareness settles, as the idea of a hidden self-healing switch inside your head stops sounding mystical and starts feeling obvious, you are already stepping into the role the ancients intended for you, not a follower, not a patient, not a seeker chasing external answers, but a conscious operator of your own internal technology. And that realization alone is enough to begin the healing process. Before any activation can occur, before the hidden self-healing button can respond, the body must first recognize safety, because the nervous system will not open a gate while it believes it is under threat. And this is where most people unknowingly sabotage themselves, not because they lack discipline or belief, but because they attempt to access deep regulation from a state of urgency, expectation, or force. And the body interprets force as danger, which tightens the very pathways you are trying to open, and the ancient texts attributed to Thoth are precise about this point, stating again and again that the gate opens only for the one who approaches without violence, without demand, without impatience, because the gate itself is alive, responsive, intelligent. And this intelligence is now understood in modern terms as the autonomic nervous system, which operates far faster than conscious thought and responds primarily to sensation, posture, temperature, rhythm, and breath, not to words or logic. And so Chapter 2 is not about stimulation yet, it is about orientation. Learning how to locate the Feng Fu point not as a mechanical target, but as a living threshold, a place where attention meets anatomy and awareness becomes instruction. And to understand this, you must first release the idea that your head is merely a container for thought, because in reality, it is a control hub layered with sensory feedback loops, and at the base of the skull, where the occipital bone curves inward and meets the first cervical vertebra, there exists a small hollow, subtle, easily missed, yet profoundly influential, and this hollow is not random. It is the place where the brainstem descends, where signals governing heart rate, digestion, immune response, and emotional regulation pass like currents through a narrow strait. And in ancient language this was called the Gate of Wind, because it is where unseen forces enter and leave, where internal weather shifts, where calm becomes storm and storm becomes calm. And to locate it physically you do not need tools or measurements, only presence, because when you gently tilt your head forward and run your fingers along the base of your skull, you will feel a natural indentation just below the ridge. And this is not merely bone and tissue, it is a convergence point where touch is translated into neural messaging. And when you place awareness there, even without contact, something subtle begins to happen, a quieting, a slight deepening of breath, a softening behind the eyes. And this is your first confirmation that you have found the correct place, because the body always responds to being seen, and Thoth's teachings emphasize this repeatedly, that attention itself is a form of nourishment, that where awareness goes, energy follows, and where energy follows, function reorganizes. And modern neuroscience mirrors this truth by showing that focused attention alters neural firing patterns, changes blood flow, and modulates vagal tone, meaning that simply locating the point with calm awareness already begins the healing process. And this is why preparation matters. Because if you approach this gate while scrolling, rushing, holding your breath, or bracing your jaw, the signal becomes distorted, and the nervous system remains guarded. But when you approach slowly, when you soften your shoulders, unclench your tongue from the roof of your mouth, and allow your breath to drop into the belly, you are already sending the message that there is no emergency, that this moment is safe, and safety is the language the vagus nerve understands best. And this is the part that was never taught in schools or clinics, that healing is less about intervention and more about permission, because the body does not need to be convinced to heal, it needs to be allowed to stop defending. And this is why ancient initiations were conducted in silence, in caves, in temples, in darkness or candlelight, because the environment itself down-regulated the nervous system before any instruction was given. And while you may not be in a temple now, you can create an internal equivalent by choosing stillness, by pausing the constant intake of stimulation, by letting the nervous system settle enough to feel subtle sensation again. Because subtlety is where this work lives, not in dramatic surges, but in gentle shifts. And as you sit with your attention at the base of the skull, you may notice resistance, discomfort, or even a strange emotional response. And this is not a sign of failure, it is a sign of stored information, because the nervous system stores experience in the body, especially in transitional areas like the neck and jaw where vigilance accumulates. And Thoth described this as the weight of unspoken memory, the residue of experiences that were never fully processed and therefore became tension. And when awareness touches these areas, the system may initially tighten before it releases, like a muscle that has been clenched for years suddenly realizing it can let go. And this is why patience is essential, because forcing release only creates more. Holding, while steady presence invites unwinding, and modern trauma science now confirms that slow, controlled attention to bodily sensation is one of the most effective ways to restore nervous system regulation, because it re-establishes a sense of agency and internal safety. And this aligns perfectly with the Hermetic principle that the observer influences the observed, meaning that when you observe your body without judgment, it begins to reorganize itself around coherence. And as you continue to locate and familiarize yourself with the Feng Fu point, you are not just finding a spot, you are training your nervous system to trust your awareness, to recognize you as a safe internal guide rather than another source of pressure. And this trust is what makes activation possible, because without trust, the gate remains closed, and with trust it opens naturally, often without effort. And many people report that simply resting attention here for a few minutes a day changes their baseline state, reducing background anxiety, improving sleep, softening emotional reactivity. And this is not because something mystical is happening, but because something fundamental is returning to balance. The parasympathetic system is reasserting itself, the internal alarm is lowering its volume, and the body is remembering how to self-regulate. And Thoth's text described this stage as the quieting of the waters, the phase where the inner noise settles enough for deeper instruction to be received. And it is crucial to understand that skipping this phase leads to superficial results, because without preparation the stimulation becomes mechanical, stripped of its intelligence, and the body may respond briefly but not integrate the change. Whereas when preparation is honored, the effects compound over time, creating a new baseline rather than a temporary shift. And this is the difference between a technique and a ritual, between a hack and a practice, because a ritual is not about repetition alone, it is about relationship. And the relationship you are building here is with your own nervous system, learning its language, respecting its pace, and recognizing that healing unfolds in layers, not leaps. And as this chapter closes, what matters most is not that you have memorized a location, but that you have begun to listen, that you have slowed enough to feel, that you have acknowledged the intelligence within your own body. Because once that acknowledgement is established, the next phase becomes possible, the phase where stimulation turns into activation, where touch, temperature, and intention combine to flip the switch that has been dormant not because it was broken, but because no one taught you how to approach it correctly. And now that you know where the gate is and how to prepare the system, you are standing at the threshold, and the body is listening. Activation is not an event you force. It is a response the body offers when the correct conditions are met. And this is why the ancients encoded the sequence so carefully, because they understood that timing, rhythm, and gentleness determine whether the nervous system opens or contracts. And in the teachings attributed to Thoth, this phase is described as the turning of the silent key, a moment so subtle it can be missed if the mind is chasing sensation, yet so powerful it can reorganize your internal state in under a minute. And modern neuroscience now echoes this truth by showing that the vagus nerve responds most effectively not to intensity but to consistency, to signals that are slow, rhythmic, and predictable. Because predictability equals safety, and safety is the gateway to parasympathetic activation. And this is where the 60-second sequence emerges, not as a mystical number chosen arbitrarily, but as the approximate window the nervous system requires to shift dominance from sympathetic vigilance to parasympathetic regulation when given the right input. and before anything touches the Feng Fu point. The body must already be in a receptive posture, meaning the spine is upright but not rigid, the shoulders are relaxed, the jaw is loose, the tongue rests gently in the mouth, and the breath flows through the nose without strain, because posture itself sends information to the brainstem, and a collapsed or braced posture tells the system to stay on guard, while a balanced posture communicates readiness without threat. And once this alignment is established, the activation begins not with pressure but with temperature, because the vagus nerve is highly sensitive to thermal input, which is why ancient practices often used cool stones, water or air at this location, and modern research confirms that brief cold exposure at the base of the skull can stimulate vagal tone, lower heart rate, and calm the nervous system. But what matters most is not the cold itself. It is the contrast, the clear sensory signal that cuts through mental noise and anchors awareness in the body, and as the cool sensation is applied gently to the Feng Fu point, whether through touch, cooling, or focused attention, the first 30 seconds are not about change, they are about listening, allowing the nervous system to register the stimulus without interpretation, without judgment, without expectation. And this is where many people unknowingly interrupt the process by checking for results, scanning for sensation, or mentally narrating what should be happening. And this mental activity pulls the system back into the head, away from the body. And the vagus nerve does not respond to analysis, it responds to felt safety. And so the instruction here is deceptively simple. Remain present. Let the breath deepen naturally. Let the attention stay anchored at the base of the skull without gripping. And during these first moments the body may respond with a sigh, a swallow, a yawn, or a subtle wave of warmth, all signs that the parasympathetic system is beginning to engage. And Thoth's texts describe this as the breath of return, the moment the body remembers its original rhythm. And as the sequence continues into the next 30 seconds, something deeper begins to unfold, because the nervous system starts to shift state. Heart rate variability increases, muscle tone decreases, and the background tension that has been normalized for years begins to loosen. And this is often accompanied by emotional release, not because something new is being created, but because something old is being allowed to dissolve. And the key here is non-interference, because the body knows exactly how to unwind when given permission, and interference, whether through trying to intensify the sensation or suppress it, only delays the process. And this is why the 60-second window is so powerful, because it is short enough to bypass resistance and long enough to initiate a real shift, and repeated daily. This sequence trains the nervous system to access regulation more quickly each time, building a new default state rather than relying on crisis-driven resets. And what makes this truly transformative is the addition of conscious intention, not as a demand for healing, but as a statement of safety, because intention directs attention, and attention directs neural firing. And when you gently affirm internally that you are safe, that you are present, that the body can let go, you are speaking the language the nervous system understands. And Thoth emphasized that words are secondary to tone, meaning that it is not the content of the intention that matters most, but the emotional quality behind it. Calm, grounded, patient, and when that quality is present, the vagus nerve responds by lowering inflammatory signals, improving digestion, regulating immune response, and calming the stress axis. And while modern science measures these effects in heart rate and cortisol levels, the subjective experience is often described as a sense of coming home, a quiet clarity, a feeling that the body is no longer bracing against life. And this is the moment many people realize that healing does not always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives as absence, the absence of tension, the absence of fear, the absence of noise. And this absence is not emptiness, it is space. And space is where vitality returns. And Thoth referred to this as the still point, the place where movement and rest coexist, where the system is alert yet relaxed, responsive yet grounded, and accessing this state even briefly rewires the brain over time, because the nervous system learns through experience, not instruction. And each time you return to this 60-second ritual, you reinforce the pathway that says regulation is available, that calm is accessible, that safety is not dependent on external conditions, and this is why this practice is not about escaping stress, but about building resilience. Because a regulated system can move through challenge without fragmentation. And as this chapter closes, it is important to understand that activation is not a one-time event. It is a relationship, a dialogue between awareness and biology, and the more consistently you engage with this process, the more fluent that dialogue becomes, until eventually the body no longer needs the external cue, because it has learned the internal pattern. And this is the true meaning of unlocking the hidden self-healing button, not that you press it once and everything changes forever, but that you regain access to a function that was always yours, a function that allows you to return to balance again and again, regardless of circumstance, and once this access is established, the deeper layers of healing, release, and reprogramming become possible because the gate is no longer closed, it is responsive, and the system is ready for the next level of integration.